It was a cold, quiet morning when I first realized something was wrong. The house was still, except for the constant hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I had always known my mom to be strict, a woman who ran the household with a set of unspoken rules that I never dared to break. Her love for me was a silent, unyielding presence that loomed over every decision I made. But lately, it had become clear that something deeper was festering between us, something neither of us wanted to face. My name is Alana. I'm 17, black, and always felt like I was walking a fine line between being the good daughter my mother expected and finding my own path. We lived in a small town, far from the hustle of city life. Our home was modest, tucked away in a neighborhood where the sound of children playing outside echoed through the streets and where everyone knew each other's business. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that I didn't belong, at least, not entirely. My mom worked long hours as a nurse. Her schedule was unpredictable, and when she came home, she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. It meant that there wasn't much room for casual conversation, let alone a discussion about my dreams, my struggles, or my desire to break free. Her rules were simple but strict: do well in school, keep your head down, and stay out of trouble. That was all that mattered. I had learned to navigate life quietly, but deep down, I knew I couldn't stay in the shadows forever. It was on one of those nights, sitting alone in my room, that I stumbled upon something that seemed like an escape. My heart ached for something different, something more than the ordinary life I had been given. That's when I found Levi. I didn't know it at the time, but he would soon become the catalyst for everything that would change in my life. Levi wasn't like anyone I had ever met. He was charming, confident, and had an understanding of life that felt just out of reach for me. He knew exactly how to make me feel seen, like I mattered in a way that no one else had. The more we talked, the more I felt drawn to him. Levi wasn't just a man behind a screen, he was someone who promised a different world, a world where people like me could escape from the rigid expectations of society. But at the time, I didn't know where that world would lead. I thought I was just seeking something new, something exciting. Little did I know, that innocent longing would soon transform into something darker than I ever imagined. Levi first appeared in my life through an online forum. It was an odd place to meet someone, but I didn't question it at first. The forum was filled with people from all walks of life, sharing their experiences and discussing various topics: politics, philosophy, anything and everything. But for me, it became an escape. I wasn't really looking for a connection, but when I saw his messages pop up on my screen, something about him was different. He wasn't like the others. He didn't use cryptic language or try to impress with fancy words. Levi spoke simply but with such authority that I couldn't help but be intrigued. His profile picture was mysterious, a dark-haired man with piercing eyes that seemed to look right through me. Our first conversation was about nothing, just casual chat. But it didn't take long before he started talking about deeper things, things I hadn't been brave enough to think about. "You're different from everyone else here," Levi said, once we'd exchanged a few messages. "You know that, right?" I chuckled at first, unsure of what to make of the compliment. But there was something in the way he said it, something that made me feel like he saw right into the core of who I was. It was an attention I wasn't used to, and I liked it. As our conversations deepened, I learned that Levi wasn't just a man with answers, he had a vision. He talked about freedom, about breaking away from the constraints of society, and about finding a community that truly understood you. His words were intoxicating, and before I knew it, I had shared things with him that I had never told anyone. He promised me that I could be part of something bigger, something special. It wasn't long before Levi introduced me to the group, a collection of individuals who shared his philosophy. They seemed like regular people at first, people who, like me, were looking for a way to escape the mundanity of life. They were all members of a new kind of collective, a group that rejected the materialistic, judgmental world we lived in. It was a promise of something better, something real. "All you have to do is trust," Levi said, his voice calm and steady. Trust in the vision we have. We can help you see things for what they truly are. The more I talked to him, the more I found myself wanting to believe. Levi made it seem so simple, so easy. All I had to do was take a step toward freedom, to let go of the chains I didn't even know I was wearing. The group was there, waiting for me, ready to welcome me with open arms. I didn't realize then that this was how it started. This was how my life would be turned upside down. When I first joined the group, it seemed innocent enough. We met in secret, online chats at night, where we could discuss our dreams, our frustrations, and our desire to find something more. They spoke in cryptic terms, but I felt like I was part of something meaningful. It was like I was finally seeing the world from a different perspective. Levi was the leader, guiding us, showing us the way. He spoke with such conviction that it was hard not to believe in what he said. There were others in the group, people I began to recognize by their usernames. Some of them were older, more experienced, and they acted as mentors, helping us understand the teachings of the group. At first, the promises were simple: freedom, purpose, the chance to escape the mundane life that everyone else seemed to accept. But as time went on, those promises began to feel more like a pull, something that couldn't be resisted. They began encouraging us to disconnect from our families, to sever the ties that had held us back. I didn't think it was strange at first. After all, they told me that my family would never understand the truth, that they would hold me back from my true potential. They encouraged me to distance myself, to stop seeking validation from anyone but the group. At first, it felt empowering. I was making decisions for myself, doing things I had never dared to do before. But little by little, the group's hold on me began to tighten. Levi would send me private messages, checking in, asking how I was doing, how I was feeling. His words made me feel special, like I was the one he truly cared about. It was intoxicating, and I began to crave that attention. He would always tell me I was getting stronger, that I was becoming part of something greater than myself. But as I spent more time with the group, the more I noticed the darkness creeping in. The others in the group began to change. They were no longer the people I had first met. They became more distant, more robotic, following orders without question. It was as if their personalities were being stripped away, replaced by the group's ideology. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that everything was fine, but deep down, I felt something shifting. I wasn't just being encouraged to break away from my family, I was being told to abandon all my past connections. Friends. Gone. The people I once trusted. No longer relevant. I wasn't just losing my ties to the world, I was losing myself. As weeks turned into months, I found myself slipping deeper into the group's world. My once vibrant life, filled with laughter and the comfort of old friendships, slowly began to fade into the background. I stopped visiting friends, stopped attending school events, stopped even answering texts or calls from my mom. I had been taught that those connections were distractions, hindrances to my growth, and that true freedom lay in letting go of everything that had once defined me. The group's rhetoric was soothing, its promises alluring, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. Levi's influence over me grew stronger each day. He began to invite me into more private discussions, those with the core members of the group. These weren't just chats, they were rituals, designed to reinforce our loyalty. We discussed purification techniques, how to rid ourselves of the attachments that weighed us down. I was told to focus only on the present, to be reborn through their teachings. Everything else, the life I had known, was just a shadow, an illusion. I started to see my mother less as the woman who had given me life and more as a figure from a distant past, someone I no longer needed. She didn't understand me, I told myself. She couldn't. When she asked where I was going or why I was acting strange, I felt an overwhelming need to hide the truth from her. I could never explain the feeling of peace I found in the group. She would never understand. And yet, despite the growing emotional distance, there were moments when a strange guilt would grip me. The house was always quiet when I came home at night, as if the walls themselves could sense my withdrawal. But even then, the guilt never lasted long. Levi's voice, his soothing, confident voice, reminded me that I was becoming someone new, someone better. But the isolation didn't stop at home. I began to distance myself from everyone else too. I ignored messages from friends who wondered why I hadn't come around. I withdrew from the activities I used to love. My world had become small and contained within the group, within Levi's influence. But there was something else happening. A change in me that I couldn't quite explain. I became more rigid, more closed off, more focused on the teachings that had replaced my identity. I no longer smiled as much, no longer felt the warmth of connection to anyone except those who approved of the group's ideology. The deeper I sank, the more I noticed it was not just my relationships that were being altered. I was changing. I began to see things differently, through a lens that filtered everything through the group's philosophy. People who didn't understand were misguided or weak. The ones who questioned the group were infected by the outside world. These were the words I had come to use, and I didn't even realize when they began to replace my own thoughts. My world, once filled with color, was now washed in gray, and I didn't even know if I cared anymore. I was finally free, I told myself. I had found purpose. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice, a quiet, distant voice, began to whisper doubts. I pushed it away, telling myself it was just fear. Fear of change, of the unknown. But the whispers wouldn't go away. It wasn't until that night, when I overheard a conversation between two of the group's higher-ups, that I truly began to see the cracks in the facade. I was alone in my room, scrolling through messages on my phone when I heard the voices coming from the room next door. I recognized the voices of two members I had come to trust, Sarah and Alan. They were talking in hushed tones, but the words were sharp, full of tension. "They're getting too close," Sarah said. "If we let them get any more involved, it'll be harder to keep control." Alan's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I know. But they'll follow us. They always do. Once they're in, they can't leave. They won't even want to." The words echoed in my mind like an alarm bell, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, unable to process what I was hearing. Was I just another tool to them? Was I just a pawn in a larger game, manipulated by promises of freedom and purpose? I didn't know who they were talking about. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the others, those who had come before me, those who had already abandoned everything. But the realization hit me like a cold wave. This wasn't freedom. It was control. Suddenly, the teachings that had once felt so empowering now seemed suffocating. They spoke of purification, of letting go, but what if it wasn't about growth at all? What if it was about stripping away everything that made us who we were, until we became nothing but shadows of ourselves? I couldn't think straight. I had been so sure of this life, so sure that this was the way forward. But now, doubt was creeping in. The voice inside me grew louder, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hear it. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right. Kaya's arrival was the moment everything shifted. She was an ex-member of the group, someone who had been part of it before it became what it was now. Her story was different from the others. She had escaped, and now she was trying to warn people like me before it was too late. At first, I didn't believe her. I had heard stories from other ex-members, but they always seemed far-fetched, like the desperate cries of people who couldn't handle the group's teachings. But Kaya's eyes told a different story. There was pain in them, the kind that came from knowing what it was like to be trapped in a world where everything you thought you knew was a lie. She came to me in secret, meeting in an abandoned parking lot late one evening. Her words were urgent, filled with raw emotion. "You don't have to stay," she told me, grabbing my arm as if to physically pull me away from the group. "They'll break you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left." You need to get out now, while you still can. I wanted to believe her, but the fear inside me was powerful. The group had become my family, my only source of comfort. But as Kaya spoke, I saw the truth in her eyes, and I began to understand just how far the group's influence reached. I don't know how, I whispered, my heart racing in my chest. How do I leave? Kaya smiled, a sad but knowing smile. You just have to want to. And when the time comes, you'll know what to do. The plan was simple but terrifying. Kaya had managed to contact a few other ex-members who had escaped the group and were now living in hiding. They knew the ins and outs of the cult, knew the tricks they used to keep people under control. The escape wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be clean, but it was possible. And that was enough. We couldn't trust anyone in the group, not even those who had once been my closest allies. The night I decided to leave, I felt the weight of every decision I had ever made pressing down on me. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I waited until midnight. I packed a small bag with the essentials, clothes, money, my phone, and made my way to the meeting spot. Every step felt like a betrayal, like I was leaving behind a piece of myself. But as I reached the door, I felt something else, freedom. Levi's face flashed in my mind, but I pushed it away. This wasn't just about leaving the group, it was about reclaiming my life, my identity. The escape was messy. There were phone calls, frantic messages from group members asking where I was, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. They were closing in, but Kaya's contacts were already working, and I was whisked away to a safe house, far from the reach of the group. The relief didn't come immediately. I spent hours lying in a room, shaking, my heart still racing. But when I finally took a deep breath and looked around, I realized something. This was the beginning of my new life. The days that followed my escape felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions and realizations. At first, I didn't know how to feel. There was a profound sense of relief, of finally breathing fresh air after suffocating for so long. But there was also a deep sorrow, a grief for the life I had left behind. It wasn't just about the group, it was about everything they had stolen from me, my confidence, my relationships, and my sense of self. Kaya stayed with me during the initial days of my recovery. She understood the complexity of what I was going through, having been through the same process herself. We spent hours talking, mostly in silence, but sometimes in quiet reflection, as if letting the weight of what we had both been through settle in. Her guidance was invaluable, though there were moments when I felt the sting of shame for not realizing sooner what was happening, for falling into the trap, for betraying my own instincts. The real test came when I was ready to reach out to my family. I had spent so many months avoiding them, convinced they wouldn't understand, that I had convinced myself I didn't need them anymore. But the truth was undeniable. When I thought about my mother, my father, I realized how much I had missed them. I had pushed them away under the pretense of growth, but now, the only thing I wanted was their love, their understanding, and their forgiveness. It took me a few days to gather the courage, but when I finally picked up the phone and called my mom, I didn't know what to expect. She answered on the second ring, her voice trembling. "Where have you been?" she asked. "We've been so worried, so scared." I could hear the raw emotion in her voice, and it broke something inside me. I had taken her love for granted, and now it felt like a foreign concept, something I wasn't sure I deserved. "Mom," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm so sorry." She was quiet for a long moment before she spoke again, her voice full of warmth and relief. "I've been praying for you. I knew you were in trouble. Come home. Please." The floodgates opened then, and I couldn't stop the tears that streamed down my face. The fear of rejection, the guilt, the shame, they all vanished in that moment. My mother was there, and she was waiting for me to come home. I wasn't alone anymore. I made arrangements to meet her the next day. We cried, we embraced, and we spoke for hours. I tried to explain everything, what had happened, how I had gotten involved, the things I had learned. But most of all, I just apologized. For disappearing, for allowing myself to be manipulated, for hurting her in ways I hadn't understood until now. My father was a little more reserved, but he was there, offering his support in his quiet way. He didn't say much, but his presence spoke volumes. Over time, they both helped me rebuild what I had torn down. The journey wasn't quick, nor was it easy. Trust needed to be earned again, and I had to work hard to prove that I could be the daughter they had once known. But slowly, I started to heal. The path back to myself wasn't linear. Some days, the memories of the group crept back in, whispers in my mind, like echoes of a past life. But with each passing day, those memories grew fainter, replaced by the love and support of my family, and the strength I was rediscovering within myself. I had lost so much, but I had also gained something invaluable: freedom. Real freedom, not the false promises of liberation I had been sold. True freedom was the ability to make my own choices, to reclaim my identity, and to live a life that was mine, not someone else's. Levi's voice still echoed in my mind, though it didn't hold the same power it once did. I knew now that I had been part of something dangerous, something that promised salvation but ultimately sought to destroy the very things that made me who I was. The process of rebuilding my life wasn't simple, nor would it ever be. But I had learned one thing through it all: I was stronger than I thought. The cult had tried to erase me, to strip me of everything that made me whole, but they couldn't take away my resilience, my ability to fight back, and the love of the people who cared for me. In the end, I had escaped the darkness. I had freed myself from the chains that had bound me and, in doing so, found a sense of belonging in the only place that truly mattered: home. I may have walked into that dark place thinking I was lost, but now, I walked out with my head high, knowing that no matter what, I was never lost again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free. Thank you for listening to From Belonging to Betrayal, A Search for Freedom. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. Don't forget to check out the videos appearing on your screen for more thrilling adventures. Stay tuned, and see you in the next one.